Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the State of Higher Education in California webinar. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Should you wish to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press star, then 0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded June 18, 2015. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today. My name is Michelle Siqueiros, and I serve as the president of the Campaign for College Opportunity. But as the first in my family to go to college, college graduate is still my favorite title. Like many first-generation and low-income students who attend college and earn a degree, that diploma for me opened many doors of opportunity for me and my family. It ensured not only my ability to become a professional in a field that I love, but that I wouldn't have the same stress of living paycheck to paycheck my mom did. Today's economy is even more demanding of workers with educational preparation. It's also a harsh reality that a high school diploma or less is one of the biggest predictors of poverty. The wage premium between a high school graduate and a college graduate has never been bigger. But let me be clear, the benefits of a college education are not just good for individuals. In fact, it's what has made our state strong. Better educated workers create the innovation and technology that has made California the 7th largest economy in the world. It also provides greater tax revenue for the state because college graduates earn more money, pay more taxes on that income, and require less social services that cost the state. That's why over 11 years ago, the Campaign for College Opportunity was founded, concerned that our state leaders were not keeping up with the growing need to ensure a spot in college for our growing and diverse young adult population, and equally concerned that our colleges and universities needed to do more to better serve the students they have and get them to a certificate, to transfer, and or to a degree. And a big challenge facing California today is our ability to ensure that college preparation, attendance, and success is happening for all of our students, especially given our growing diverse population. So Truman's quote and comments in 1947 are as true today, 67 years after he spoke them. Today's webinar will focus on our most recent reports, part of our State of Higher Education in California series, the Latino and Black report. There are over 400 people on this call, so I'm grateful that you are joining us today and that the interest in supporting progress towards greater equity in higher education for all students is strong. Beginning last winter, as the U.S. Census released new data, our research and policy analyst, Nadia Valiani, began working on preparing the research for this. She was more recently joined by Dr. Daniel Bird, our policy research director, who became a part of my team in early April. I'm really grateful for their smarts and dedication for producing stellar research for the campaign. These reports provide important data on the educational attainment, enrollment, readiness, and completion for Latino and Black students in our state. As many of you know, carrying out good research is not an easy task, and I'm glad we can depend on our senior faculty advisory board, which includes experts in California and as far away as Washington, D.C., who reviewed and provided valuable feedback as the report was coming together. I also want to thank the California Department of Education, the California Community College Chancellor's Office, the Cal State Chancellor's Office, and the University of California for providing data, responding to questions, and offering their own feedback on the report. Insight from the California Student Aid Commission and the Institute for College Access and Success was also invaluable. As we release the report today, I'm proud to be joined by Rob Lapsley, President of the California Business Roundtable, one of our co-founding organizations, and also a board member here at the campaign. Noel Massie, President of the Central California District for UPS and board member of the National Urban League, the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce, and a UCLA advisory board member, is also here with us. Carrie Hannell, Deputy Director for EdTrust West, who served over 15 years of experience in education research, policy, and practice, and really has been a champion for equity in education. And finally, Dr. Katie Hern. She's the Director of the California Acceleration Project and an instructor at Chabot College. She's been leading groundbreaking, nationally recognized work in terms of teaching students how to read, write, and think critically for more than 20 years, and through the California Acceleration Project has led efforts to redesign the delivery of developmental courses that have significantly improved student outcomes. They will contribute their own thoughts during this webinar, so just a little housekeeping. If you have any questions, you will be able to type them directly onto your chat box on the left side of your screen. If you're on Twitter or Facebook, please feel free to share the report and use the hashtags CAHigherEd. You can follow, tweet, or retweet me on Twitter at MSCollegeOp, as well as tweet us at our handle, which is CollegeOp. You can find all the materials related to these reports on our website, including the PowerPoint, so you don't have to vigorously take notes, on our website at www.collegecampaign.org. So to start us off, I just want to highlight and remind everyone how diverse our California population is. 15 million Latinos make up the largest racial ethnic group in the state. 94% of those that are under 18 were born here in the U.S., and 52% of Latino youth of our youth in California are Latino. California is also home to one of the largest Black populations in the country. And in critical regions of our state, including LA County, the Inland Empire, San Diego, Sacramento, and the Bay Area, they make up significant numbers of our residents. As we reviewed educational attainment by race, you can see some of the huge variations for adults in California. Educational attainment varies widely by race. Fewer than 2 in 10 Latino adults have a bachelor's degree or higher, and a third of Black adults have some college but no degree. Here to share a few of his thoughts on why educational attainment matters given this huge diversity in California is Rob Lapsley, the president of the California Business Roundtable. Some of you may have seen his recent op-ed in the Sacramento Bee on how our state's economy depends on Latino educational success. Rob?
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Michelle, thank you for, again, another outstanding body of work and helping to continue to focus on the priorities of where California needs to go for our future business climate. So ladies and gentlemen, I just want to essentially reinforce a couple key messages on behalf of the business community and specifically some of our members. Their focus as employers, large employers, medium-sized businesses, small businesses, all understand that if we do not have the strength of an educated population of Latino and Black communities, we are not going to be able to grow jobs and investment in this state. They are now the consumer markets. They are the foundation of where we will get almost every single employee of what they need to do to grow jobs in the future as hopefully our economy grows. And if we do not have, obviously, a well-prepared workforce, they are not going to be successful in their businesses. So closing this gap, focusing on how we can move the communities from high school to college, being prepared so that they can then take prepared students and train them for the jobs of both today and the future, is where we are focusing our time here at the Roundtable and where, frankly, our members are spending a lot of time internally in trying to figure out how they can meet the current gaps. So with California's economy, we now have a two-tier economy. We look at actually recent numbers. Right now, in our unemployment rate, as California has grown jobs, we've grown low-wage jobs and we've grown high-wage jobs, and we are losing middle-class economic ladder jobs that have been a backbone for, quite frankly, the Latino and Black communities. And we are, while we try to reverse this, right now today, these are recent numbers that we wanted to share. Unemployment among the various communities in California in the Asian community, unemployment is at 5%. Among the white population in California, unemployment is about 7%. Among the Latino community, unemployment is approximately just over 8%. And in the Black community, unemployment is at 14%. So you see the differences among the communities, but as the communities grow, we have got to address these gaps, which is why reports of what Michelle is doing is so critical to be able to build policies to be able to address these. So thank you for the opportunity to listen and be part of supporting this work, Michelle. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob. So now I want to share some interesting findings regarding college enrollment. First, in spite of a significant large Latino population, Latinos are underrepresented in all segments of higher education. The blue line that you see here represents the percentage of young adults, 18 to 24, that are Latino. So if Latinos were represented in proportion to their numbers, that orange bar would reach the blue line. If they were overrepresented, they would exceed the blue line. In spite of record number of Latino high school graduates and the population figures you saw earlier, we still have a long way to go. These next charts show you the representation of blacks in California higher education. As you can see, blacks are slightly overrepresented in for-profit colleges and community colleges and underrepresented at the UC, CSU, and independent colleges. Our reports also reviewed college readiness, and Carrie Hannell from EdTrust West is going to share a few thoughts about college readiness given her expertise in K-12 education policy. But first, I wanted to pause and ask those of you on the call to share what you think is the biggest barrier to student readiness. So right now, you're going to see a poll. You have a few options in the poll in front of you. Feel free to click the biggest barrier you believe exists for students. And while we compute the poll results, Carrie will share her thoughts. Carrie?
Okay, thanks, Michelle. It's really great to be here on behalf of EdTrust West. We're an advocacy organization committed to closing opportunity and achievement gaps for low-income students and students of color in California, and we particularly focus on the K-12 system. And I think these poll questions are interesting, particularly the juxtaposition of college knowledge, A to G, and things like cultural expectations, because we've been in school districts across the state, and when we survey high school students, we hear that about 95% of students say that they plan to attend college. And about 90% of parents also say that they believe their child will be ready to go to college after high school, and that holds true across both racial and economic lines. But at the same time, when we ask teachers and counselors similar questions, only about 3/4 say that they believe all students are capable of going to college. So clearly there's a big disconnect. And one of the big inequities that we focus on is this piece about high expectations and equitable expectations. We find that this manifests itself in a number of different ways. Let's take assignments, kind of tasks that students get in class. When we look at these, we find that students in under-resourced communities are often assigned less challenging coursework, less challenging assignments, tasks, homework than their more advantaged peers. And that's even across the exact same grades and subjects. So they're getting kind of different assignments than their peers. And we also find that they're in different kinds of courses. Tracking is alive and well in California high schools, and that cuts very clearly across racial lines. We see that students of color and low-income students are less likely to have college prep coursework, including A to G, and that begins even before high school. So if we look just for an example at Algebra 1 in 8th grade, we find that students who completed Algebra 1 in 8th grade are more likely to be assigned to Algebra 1 again if they're students of color when they go to 9th grade, whereas white students are more likely to be assigned to the next math course when they go to high school. So there are systematic patterns of tracking students that begin quite early. College knowledge is a big piece of this. We find through our research that only about half of high school students fill out the FAFSA, the application for federal financial aid. And we hear from many students that they feel that tuition for a 4-year college is out of reach. The sticker cost paired with the fact that many of these students have to work to help with household bills contributes to this. They might not understand what aid they could be eligible for. Some students worry that applying for grants or loans will put their parents' legal status in jeopardy. And first-generation college goers may not have families who can guide them through the college application process and need extra support with that. And then, of course, there are the safety nets. Students who come from low-income families and under-resourced communities often arrive at school with greater challenges. They might need extra academic support and more learning time to catch up. They might need help learning academic content while also learning to speak English. They're more likely to come to school suffering the effects of stress and anxiety and poor health, and therefore demand more socio-emotional supports. But rather than give more to the students who need the most, we traditionally give them less. We often find that these students are in schools with worse facilities, less funding, newer teachers. They experience greater teacher turnover. We're starting to address this as a state. The local control funding formula is directing additional resources and more flexible resources to communities with greater student need. And that's giving them the opportunity to think about how they can invest in the students who need the most. But it's still not enough. We need more funding. We need to address many of these structural issues and patterns, and of course these patterns of perception and these kind of this crisis of low expectations that our students are facing in our schools.
Thank you, Carrie. So we had over 130 respondents, and we have a few people that asked for an other category, and we actually purposely just put these four in to force folks to pick one of these, so we know that that's a challenge. But obviously we hear a lot of comments coming in through the chat, so feel free if you want to add what other barriers you think exist to student readiness. We will talk about some of these as I share some of the findings from the reports, but as you can see, college knowledge seems to be the biggest barrier that most of you on this call think exists, followed by family income, and then A through G requirements, and then finally cultural expectations. So with that, I actually want to share some of these barriers for college readiness that we certainly found in our report. So first, let's talk about A through G. Only 3 in 10 Black and Latino high school graduates from the class of 2014 completed the A through G requirements that are necessary to even be able to apply to the University of California, the Cal State University, and most independent colleges. This means that right off the bat, 70% of Black and Latino students don't even have this as an option. You may be asking why. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise to learn that so few Black and Latino students attend top schools in the state, as this next slide will show you. Essentially, before even getting to college, Black and Latino students face many challenges. They are more likely to be low income, first generation to go to college, attend low-performing schools, and lack the adequate rigor and coursework that prepares them well for college. On top of these K-12 challenges, our state colleges and universities have also dealt with devastating budget cuts during the Great Recession, which really limited the number of spots in college that were available, the courses that were offered, the ability to focus more on college success and support services. Thankfully, the current budget deal aims to reverse many of these factors, but there's still more to do, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Once in college, students are more likely, especially Latino and Black students, to be placed in pre-college developmental courses, especially at the community college system. You can see in this next chart that almost 9 in 10 Latino and Black community college students are placed in pre-college level courses. In fact, the number of Latino students in California that are placed in pre-college level courses in the community college system could fill the largest stadium in California, more than 1.5 times. That's 144,500 students in 1 year, to be exact. So why does this matter? It matters because only 1/3 of Latino and Black students who enter these courses will ever complete a certificate, degree, or transfer. Again, only 1/3 of Latino and Black students who enter pre-college level courses in the community college system will ever reach any achievement in the next 6 years. In other words, we cannot improve college completion rates or close the racial gaps on that front without improving student success in these courses. So I'm really happy that we're joined by Katie Hern, who will share what she thinks can be done on this front.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So I just want to reiterate how important the points that Michelle just walked you through are. Black and Hispanic students are much more likely to be placed into non-credit-bearing remedial courses in math and English than white students are. And more than that, they're more likely to be placed into the very lowest levels of remediation. So not just one remedial math course or two remedial math courses, but up to 3 or 4 courses that don't earn them credit toward a degree or transfer. So they might spend 2 years in non-credit bearing remedial courses that don't advance them toward their degree, and many just opt out of college inside those sequences. They're just gone at that point. And so to look at the numbers a little bit, statewide, more than half of the Black and Hispanic students who are placed into remediation in the community colleges start in the lowest levels of remedial math, 3 and 4 semesters away from a transferable math course. And this is regardless of whether they're going into a math-intensive major or not. They might just want to be a criminal justice major or an art history major, an English major, journalism major, non-math intensive fields, but they are placed into these multiple layers of remedial math courses. So that's the bad news, but the good news is that there's a lot of research over the last 5 years showing that by redesigning how we approach remediation, especially in the community colleges, we can get much better results for all students and narrow achievement gaps for Black and Latino students. So I'm going to share a few highlights from that. So the first thing that we can do, we're learning from colleges that have been doing this, is that we can change our placement practices at the front end. So when a student arrives in the community college, they're less likely to be placed into remedial coursework and more likely to be allowed directly into credit-bearing college-level coursework in English and math. What we're learning is that they're not as unprepared as we have been believing, and that it's our placement practices that need to be reexamined. So a couple of colleges that have been leading the way on this are Long Beach City College and Butte College. And both of those have changed their placement practices to significantly increase the number of students who start directly in college-level courses. At Butte, in English, it doubled the number of students who could get into college English, and at Long Beach, it quadrupled the number of students who could get into college English. And what they're seeing is that all students' completion of college English increases dramatically, and the gaps between white students and Black and Latino students narrow. So at both colleges, Black and Latino completion of college English either doubled or tripled by making this change. The other thing that we can do in community colleges is redesign the curriculum we offer to students we place into remediation. So some students do arrive with pretty significant academic needs based on their prior educational history or their circumstances, but we want to make sure that the curriculum we place them into doesn't put them at even further disadvantage of completing their goals. So that's what my project, the California Acceleration Project, has been working on for 5 years. We are an organization that was founded by 2 community college faculty, one in English, that's myself, and one in math, to help other community college faculty redesign curricula for students we think are underprepared. And basically that involves creating pathways that allow students to progress more quickly into credit-bearing courses in English and math. And we've seen incredibly promising results from our early efforts. And I'm going to share a few on the math side. So on the math side, we've created redesigned pathways for students who are pursuing non-math intensive fields. So it's sort of an accelerated statistics pathway. And what we've seen there in the result, a study by the Research and Planning Group, is that African Americans in these redesigned CAP math pathways, their completion of college-level math quadrupled. And for Hispanic students, their completion was 2.5 times higher in these redesigned pathways. And the gaps between groups narrowed substantially. So all students are doing better in the redesigned accelerated pathways, but the gaps between the groups are narrowing. So for example, in traditional math remediation in our colleges, Asians had the highest completion of college math, and Blacks had the lowest. And in our first 8 CAP math colleges, that gap was completely eliminated. So Black students' completion was 2 points higher than Asian students' completion in the redesigned math pathways. But both groups did far better. So no one is being harmed, but everyone is doing better, and gaps are narrowing, and that's what we want. So just to wrap up, there's a really optimistic thing that I think may happen is a bill called AB 770 and a budget allocation tied to that would provide $60 million to support California community colleges to make these kinds of changes. And that would allow for substantial professional development for faculty to change their practices and change both their curricular sequences, their placement policies, as well as their pedagogy, the way that they teach developmental students, so that far more students can reach their goals. That's it for me.
Thank you, Katie, so much. I'm very excited by the important work that you're leading here in California because of how important what a difference that will make in terms of really improving college completion rates for underrepresented students. So thanks again. Our research as well reviewed the completion rates for Latino and Black students at our community colleges and universities. As you saw in a much earlier chart, the majority of Latino students who go to college start at a community college. Yet the most recent data finds that only 38% will complete. At Cal State, only 10% of Latino students will graduate within 4 years. 48% within 6 years. At the UC, the numbers are a bit better, but these are still far too low in each system and much lower when compared to their white peers. For Blacks, the numbers are even worse, and I will let you just all observe the findings here in terms of completion. At community colleges, at the Cal State, and at the University of California. So just to highlight some of the differences over time and by race, we looked at CSU graduation rates in 1999, and then we analyzed them. So here you can see that there's obviously variation for whites and Latinos, although completion 4-year rates are very low for both groups, but there is an 8% gap. We want you to see what we found in the fall of 2008. While 4-year graduation rates have increased for Latinos, the gap is even bigger because the pace of white students in the Cal State system improving their graduation rates is much faster. When we looked at direct high school to CSU enrollment, we also found some interesting trends. Black enrollment began declining after 2007 when the recession hit our state and has not increased in spite of some of our more recent economic recovery. I think what this points out too is the reality that Black students are disproportionately affected by our recession and budget cuts to the Cal State system in particular. In the UC, we found some concerning trends regarding admissions for Black and Latino students, with 2/3 of Black and Latino applicants being denied to 6 of 9 campuses. This highlights the very reality that spots in college have simply not kept pace with the growing demand for those spots. This is a real funding issue for the state to confront that clearly has a disproportionate impact on Black and Latino students. So now we want to ask you what you think is the biggest barrier to student success. You have a poll in front of you, and we want you to focus on what you think is sort of the biggest challenge facing students once they are in college. And as you submit those results, what I do want to share is that given sort of the limitation of conducting a webinar, I do advise all of you that are more interested in some of the deeper analysis in the reports that you download the full Latino and Black report from our website. We included other analysis such as undocumented students. We really analyzed for Black students in higher ed what this some college finding meant. As you saw, over 30% of Black adults have some college but no degree, so clearly that's an opportunity to really figure out how do we do a better job at keeping Black students in college, or when they leave, how do we bring them back? And we also did some analysis on Prop 209 and the effects of the ban on affirmative action in higher education in terms of enrollment for Latino and Black students. So as you select in your poll, we've had over 100 responses. You can see in front of you that lack of student support services seems to be the biggest barrier that many of you think affects students in college, followed very closely by remedial education. So we've already talked with Katie Hern about that issue. Cost of college is also high up there, lack of counseling, and unclear transfer pathways. But it definitely seems like a lack of student support services most of you see as very critical. We would certainly agree. So we know that state policy and funding are clearly important for tackling the challenges presented here, but I'm truly excited by some of the initiatives that some college leaders have undertaken to better serve their students and close these gaps. I think many of you who know the campaign know that we aren't simply just advocating for more funding for higher education. And regardless of what the funding levels are, we do believe that college leaders today can institute practices to better serve their students. So here we're going to highlight a few of those best practices. So first, we're very excited by the leadership at Cal State Fullerton. They've undertaken a very detailed strategic plan to ensure efforts that will improve graduation rates for all of their students, and in particular close the existing racial gaps that persist. They did a very thorough analysis of courses and where they were losing students, a very intentional approach to figuring out how they could improve outcomes for students. They've set forth graduation teams at each of their schools within the campus, and those graduation teams are there to provide some of the support services that many of you agree are missing and necessary on campus for students that need them. And it's important to point out that the majority of students attending our Cal State system today, and certainly the majority of Latino and Black students, are first generation. That means they don't know anybody in their immediate family that's graduated or gone to college in many cases. So they really need a lot of guidance. So we're really excited by that particular effort. At Santa Rosa Junior College, we also see a very intentional focus on improving access and success for Latino students. They have a Latino student service, a Latino student center that focuses on ensuring that students are aware of financial aid options available for them, of where they can get counseling and guidance. They've focused on doing a lot of community work to really engage Latino families and introducing them to the college campus. We also see some really great innovation coming out of San Diego State University, where 2 professors took it upon themselves to establish the Minority Male Collaborative, and it's an effort focused on increasing the success rate for Black students at community colleges in particular. Essentially, they use data to really identify what are the challenges facing Black students, and they've conducted a lot of research that's focused on the success of Black students at community colleges. They'll also be the first to tell you that much of the research has focused on how Black and Latino students maybe succeed in four-year universities, and their intention is really to address that some of those barriers are very different for community college students who may be older, may already have children. And so their research is really informing practice change at various community colleges that have adopted the Minority Male Collaborative. And it's really, from the leadership perspective, it's both college leaders and college faculty doing things differently on their campus to improve outcomes. And then finally, we also learned about the amazing work at the Umaja community. They have an effort that is essentially focused, again, on Black community college students, providing them with the support services and putting them in some cases in cohort groups to really improve their outcomes at the community colleges. Up until now, they have functioned on a completely volunteer basis. So I think some of the challenge is making sure that we can scale the efforts that we know succeed at at more community colleges than currently exist. So I hope you're all asking now, what would happen if we close these gaps that exist among students of color and their white peers? the bottom line is that higher education is both a personal benefit and a social benefit, but if we close the gaps, this is how many more educated adults we would have to meet the workforce needs in California. And we would increase California's personal income by over $135 billion. As I stated earlier, not only is it a personal investment and benefit when someone goes to college, but college graduates make more money and pay more taxes on that higher income. And finally, we would add 790,000 more four-year degrees if we close these gaps. So again, every expenditure in higher education, in our public colleges and universities, in financial aid for low-income students is really a return to the state. And previous research that we've led has essentially verified that for every dollar invested, there's a $4.50 return to the state. I think if I had a poll up here and asked everyone on this call how many of you would join me on a stock investment if I guaranteed you a $4.50 return, I suspect all of your hands would go up. So now I'm going to turn it to Noel Massie, who's joined us here, president of UPS Southern California District, and he's going to speak about the importance of education to meet our economic needs. Noel?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Can everyone hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, great. Well, I think the points are many, and I think they were made. I mean, number one, when you think about the numbers you've just witnessed and what they show up in as the forensics to the issue, it's just fairly obvious. If you're a business and you want to locate in California, to start with Rob's comment, you know that you're entering into an economy that is a two-tier economy, that there's not a lot of middle-class jobs available or middle-class folks with the ability to take middle-class jobs available. And in today's economy, 67% in the next 3 or 4 years of all positions will require that, and I think you saw some of that data. So when you're making your assessment, does it make sense for your company to put jobs here? If you're in that middle-class environment, probably the answer to that is going to be no. I see company after company leave California that are middle-tier companies. I visit about 3 to 4 UPS clients a week. Been doing that for a couple decades. And when they get ready to pull the plug, it's always about one thing: availability of people who do have the skills they need to support their business. And clearly that 2-year degree is a critical degree to the businesses in the state. You know, beyond that, when you look at some of the comments that were made, Michelle, by yourself in the surveys we took, that talks about, well, what are the barriers? Well, the forensics, again, don't support the outcome you want. You know, if you're in the 20%, 30% number on a 2-year degree, and if 67% of the positions available require one, there's a gap. And then that gap becomes very toxic to the community and very toxic to the business community. And the only way to correct it is by the initiatives and the things that were just talked about in a number of the institutions that are employing some different strategies with the help of the work being done by Katie Hern in her acceleration project. Those types of things are completely the answer. Funding's an issue. I had an opportunity to make that case to the UC president just recently at the Chamber on Napolitano, and we talked about the trends in the UC system. Clearly, they do not favor the Californian, number one, let alone the Latino and African American Californian. You know, their budgets are their budgets, and they have made choices to manage those budgets with seats being allocated differently, and you see that with the 6 of 9 data that was just shown. I think it's important for business to step up to the plate. And too often these conversations are driven by educators, nonprofits, you name it, but rarely do business leaders sit down with the legislative body and have these conversations about educational attainment. Because quite frankly, with budgets being the way that they are and priorities landing the way that they have over the last 7 or 8 years, this has been one that's been easy to push aside, but the ramifications are, you saw the numbers. For every dollar you spend on this environment, you save $4.50 later on. The numbers grow exponentially as you go down the food chain. $1 invested in early education is a $7 benefit. And I think much of the problem that we see with achievement in middle school, high school, and college, because they all ladder, really starts there. So having said that, preparation is critical. And so since we don't have a system that's prepared our kids well from 0 to 9, which is where IQ is determined, we have to do more work on the back end until we get that corrected. So the initiatives that were talked about are vital to the state. They're vital to the ecosystem, let alone the communities that we're talking about and the condition of those communities. We know that when high school dropout rates are high and college achievement is low, things like criminality go up, domestic violence goes up. I mean, there's just a whole insidious kind of, outcome from it. And a business isn't going to pick up a map and go to a place that has a dropout rate that looks like 30, 40%. You wouldn't move your house there. A business isn't going to move their business there. So I think the critical side of what was talked about is just in the evidence. The evidence is the evidence, and I think it's important that business leaders like UPS and other corporations in California join with groups like Michelle's and others and Katie's to continue to send the message that not only fiscal health and GDP growth are connected to this, but our society is connected to it. Our commitment to humanity is connected to it. And all of those things add up to the kind of environment that society needs. And the slides in the opening really spoke to that, why it's so important that access to education is equally provided and that the barriers to it are addressed today is very, very important.
Thank you so much, Noel, for joining us today and also for your leadership in the business community as an advocate for education from cradle to career, as I definitely heard you say. So finally, as all of you know, the campaign has always been focused on solutions, whether it's advocating for greater funding for higher education, fixing our community college to four-year university transfer process, advancing policy reforms that focus on improving student outcomes. We're not just here to share and bemoan these bad statistics. We're not paralyzed by these facts. We're actually excited by the possibilities of changing these around, and certainly the budget deal that has been negotiated between our legislative leaders and the governor, I think, is an important step in that direction. We see that conversation in Sacramento has centered around improving student outcomes, has centered around improving time to degree, has centered around providing more enrollment spots for students that are eligible to go to college so that they have that shot at getting a college education. But what more can you do is what I hope many of you are asking. And here in front of you, we are putting forward a few solutions that we think are really critical in terms of the future of California and how we address these issues. First of all, there is a need for a bold new state plan for higher education in California. Many of you may be very familiar with the Master Plan for Higher Education. It was drafted in 1960. It was intended to be a 10 to 15-year plan, and it was really focused on the institutional roles that the UC, the CSU, and the community colleges would play. We need a plan that is really focused on how we ensure that we are able to significantly increase the number of students who are ready for college, who go to college, who graduate from college, and that focuses on closing the persistent gaps that you've all seen through this data presented before you. Second, we clearly need to support greater college readiness in our K-12 schools. Our move towards the Common Core standards, I think, is a promising step in that direction where for the first time ever we are expecting that students will be college ready and have the critical thinking skills and rigor that we know they need once they arrive in college. We have to continue to advocate for clearer pathways once they are in college, both getting through those developmental ed courses that Katie Hern spoke about, but also making sure that once they're at a community college that they have a clear direction as to how they're going to get to transfer or how they're going to earn a degree or a certificate. Those things need to be very clear from the onset. I would say that it's very important that we also ensure greater accountability from colleges on graduation rates and on the cost of college and student loan default rates. California has certainly moved in that direction in terms of ensuring improved transfer pathways. We're very excited by the governor's inclusion in this budget that the UC create 10 transfer degree pathways into their system that are aligned with Senate Bill 1440, which we championed in 2010 with then State Senator Alex Padilla, and that they do 20 by the following year. These are all important steps in terms of making sure that the systems don't create additional hurdles and put those in front of our students. As you've already seen, many of our students have had to overcome significant hurdles just to get to college. So it's really should be unacceptable to have additional hurdles placed before them once they arrive at our college and university doors. But accountability also makes sure that we reward colleges for improving outcomes and for closing these gaps. And from all of you, I hope that you're comfortable with making your voice heard, with telling others, not just us, that these issues matter to you, especially your policymakers and California leaders. Specifically, all of these solutions mean very little if we don't talk about race and ethnicity and the differences and how we're going to address them. So while it's important to provide additional enrollment growth funding and while it's important to focus on improving time to degree and student success, we really need our leaders to be courageous about setting goals to improve outcomes for all students in our state. The numbers make it pretty clear the future of California will rise or fall based on the educational attainment and success of all of our students, especially our underrepresented Latino and Black students in California. So with that, we are going to take some questions. So I hope if you have some questions that you'll type them into the chat box, and I'm looking forward to trying to answer some of those in the next 15 minutes. I also, as you think about the questions that you want to ask, want to share with you that we are in the process of doing additional research on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders that's disaggregated by race and ethnicity. It'll be the first time a report of that type has been done. As many of you probably saw, sometimes the Asian American community looks like it's performing incredibly well and that there's no issues there, and we know that that's not true for all the different diverse ethnic groups that make up the Asian American community. So we are very excited about that research that will be coming out in August and will be the third part on our ethnic profile series. We are also doing analysis around how admission standards have changed over time in the Cal State and the UC system. That has obviously been impacted by funding support for those systems. But we are very concerned with the number of college-ready students that don't have a spot in the university. Some of that is certainly to do with the fact that we aren't keeping pace with funding enough capacity, but also with the reality that it's much harder today for a student to even be eligible to apply to a UC or CSU campus, certainly much harder than when I applied to UC San Diego 20 years ago. And I think it will hopefully inspire a conversation amongst all of us. I'm going to go and take some of the first questions. So one person has asked, I work in the area of career services. Do you have any data on the role of career services, advising, and or experiential learning on student retention or graduation rates. Unfortunately, our analysis didn't delve into that type of data, so we don't have data on that piece, but clearly the support services, the advising are critical pieces around improving college success. Where we do try to tackle that is in some of the practices, the best practices that that some of the colleges and universities have implemented in their own campus. So while I just shared a few highlights of what Cal State Fullerton and Santa Rosa College and other campuses are doing, all of those profiles can be found on our website under best practices. So I encourage you to go there and visit and learn more. Another question was made around what are the changes that have been made in placing students. So I think Katie Hern alluded to that. Katie, if you're still on the line, why don't you take that question?
Okay. So there are a number of really promising possibilities, but the one that they all share and that's really important to keep in mind is some national research out of the Community College Research Center at Columbia University has documented just very high levels of what they call underplacement intermediation, which they define as a student is required to enroll in remedial courses, but actually could have passed the college level course. And so that's just the important context to have, that there's our default of the last couple of decades has been to put students down intermediation, but there are a lot of very capable students who, if we changed our placement practices, could be successful if just allowed to enroll directly. So that's the sort of the broader research to keep in mind. And then how do you do placement if you're trying to address underplacement? Butte College, they did nothing. They were changing from one placement test to another, and when they had to reset cut scores on the new test, it just came back that it doubled the number of students who were suddenly classified college ready. So instead of 23% of incoming students, it jumped to almost 50%. And they let it stand, and lo and behold, the African American completion rate of college English tripled, and the Hispanic and Asian completion rate doubled. And white students completed at higher rates too, 1.6 times higher. So again, that's an example of all students benefited and gaps narrowed. And it was a very, they did nothing except allow more students in. The other thing that is, I think, more kind of involved but potentially very rigorous approach is to use multiple measures in placement differently. We're required to use multiple measures in placement in California community colleges ever since that Mexican American Legal Defense Fund lawsuit of our system a couple of decades ago. But we use them, that the default approach statewide has been to use multiple measures in incredibly limited ways so that very, very few students benefit. And really the primary driver has been these standardized placement tests. And so what Long Beach did is they created a research algorithm where they weighted overall high school GPA as the dominant driver of placement. Last grade in English and math was also a factor. And then the standardized placement test was also a factor, so that their placing students were placing much greater emphasis on high school transcript data than this one-time high-stakes standardized placement tests, which are really not very predictive. And when Long Beach did that, it quadrupled the number of students that got directly into college English. So it was up to 59% in the first year they did it, from something like 13%. So the how of it, I think there's a lot of really interesting and creative research going on around how to have more sophisticated placement overall. But what the Butte example shows is that just simply by letting more students in, even without that level of sophistication, we're seeing much better results.
Yes, exactly, Katie. I mean, we absolutely want to make sure that students are not stuck in remedial or developmental ed courses that they don't need to be in. That's a pretty easy way of making sure that we improve the experience in college for students and have them go directly into the credit-bearing courses where they can get to success. So thank you for that. Have a question from Laura Rangel about whether or not we've studied the effects of Prop 209 which is the effects of ending affirmative action both before and after. We actually do have a Prop 209 section in the Latino report, and we are actually posting at the end of this month a Prop 209 affirmative action brief on our website that will have a lot of data where we actually have analyzed what diversity looked like, especially in the University of California, prior to the end of affirmative action and afterwards. And just to be pretty clear, we do believe that repealing Prop 209 would be one way of ensuring greater participation for Black and Latino students in our UC system. I think it's important if I can quickly go back to one slide where we talk about UC admissions. Here you can see that the concentration of Black and Latino students is very much at UC Merced, Riverside, and Santa Cruz, and these other campuses, especially UCLA, UC San Diego, and Cal, are less diverse and have much fewer Latino and Black students on their campus. So Prop 209 has obviously had some pretty significant effects there. We encourage you to stay tuned to access that. So Arturo Ocampo has asked if the state is working or connected to the President's initiative, My Brother's Keeper. I think California does have a major effort, the Boys and Men of Color initiative that's being led by allies, including the California Endowment. I'm not sure if the state itself, but we do know that some campuses have made commitments to that effort, but I'm probably not the best expert on that note. Dennis Lopez has asked, is there research on the effects of the CSU trustees' policy to reduce remediation in the 1980s, the 2008-2010 initiative to purge the campuses of 5th and 6th year seniors contributes to low graduation rates of African American, Latino, and low-income students? Dennis, not that I'm aware of, although the Cal State system certainly might have data. I think as many of you may be aware that with the budget cuts, admissions into the Cal State system got certainly more difficult, and students through that 2008-2010 initiative who came into the Cal State with developmental education needs were required to actually pass those developmental ed courses that first year, or else were sent outside the Cal State system. Essentially, they lost their ability to remain enrolled in the Cal State campus that they were in. So we know that they were then redirected to the community college system. One thing that obviously is promising is that the Cal State, seeing the need for improving college readiness for its students, actually spent quite a bit of time looking at efforts and expanded the early assessment program into high schools so that students could be measured in the 11th grade and told about whether or not they were college ready, with the idea that they then could use their senior year to take more rigorous math or English courses or whatever they needed to improve on. So we do know that there's certainly been some positive leadership on that front. Lourdes Maldonado has asked, are the inequities found in 2-year and 4-year access and completion similar or greater when it comes to advanced degrees, PhDs and masters? Lourdes, we did not analyze PhDs or master students and whether or not the gaps are different. I would venture to provide an educated guess that given the lower numbers of bachelor degrees attained amongst Black and Latino students, that we would probably have similar findings in terms of some gaps both in pursuing these degrees and perhaps in completing them. But honestly, we've not done that analysis. If anybody on the call, because I know we have a lot of education folks, have and would be interested in sharing your thoughts on that, please chime in. Another question, I don't know who this one is coming from, is how do we get the community colleges, the Cal State and the UC systems to promote parent involvement and engagement throughout the attendance of their children in these institutions? Really great question. I know that we have David Valladolid, who is the CEO of the Parent Institute for Quality Education, on this call. I think Pique is a really great model of how they've engaged parents in college knowledge in general about what it takes to get their kids ready for college, but also in what has been a pretty strong partnership with the Cal State system on providing that information for how their students can be ready to go to the Cal State. So that's one approach. The Cal State Fullerton effort that we profiled as a best practice is another really good example. I hope that some of you will go to the website to read the fuller profile of what they're doing, but one example that they shared to us is that one department actually invites the parents of freshman students in for an orientation where they are very open about communicating the expectations and needs for students in their first year, how parents can be supportive, how much studying their students may need, introducing them to other guidance counselors and folks that can help them with regards to financial aid. And they have found that to be incredibly effective at providing parents who want to be supportive of their students' educational success with the kinds of information and tools that they need to ensure that that success actually happens. So I think those are some really good examples. Katie, I'm going to let you speak because you want to talk about the CSU and the UC policy as well on remediation. Go ahead.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, people asking about CSU and UC reminded me that there is a sort of a current policy issue that would be helpful to lend your voices to. So there's the kind of alternative redesigned math pathways that are getting such amazing results in CAP are right now sort of facing policy obstacles in terms of the UC and CSU system. And I'm going to try not to get super technical about it, but to just say, there's a real need for stakeholders to lend their voices and to communicate to UC and CSU that they need to make sure that their policies for transfer students don't pose obstacles to these kinds of amazing, promising reforms that are happening in the community college level. I think that UC and CSU system they're at risk of making policies that will lock community colleges into this sort of very broken remedial systems of remediation that we've been struggling with over the last 2 decades, and those systems are never going to produce better results and are so deeply inequitable for Black and Hispanic students. And so CSU and UC just need, I think, a level of pressure on them to say, you need to make sure that your policies for transfer students don't pose obstacles to these kinds of much desperately needed reforms on the remediation side in the community colleges.
Thank you, Katie. Agreed. So Valerie Talavera Bustillos from Cal State, or I'm not sure if you're from Cal State LA, but is sharing that Cal State LA has instituted a parent academy that has support discussions once per quarter with English and Spanish sessions for parents, so that's exciting. Lourdes Maldonado says that at UC Riverside, they hold full-day family orientation sessions for Spanish-speaking families. And I'd like to point out that actually when we did analysis, there's really great results at UC Riverside. UC Riverside is one of the most diverse campuses in the UC system, and they have no graduation gap for students by race. So clearly UC Riverside has figured out how to close the gap and is doing a great job at moving that work forward. I also wanted to share a comment about leadership and diversity in higher education. I'm trying to see if I can find who shared that comment. But I think one of the points raised was the real value of having leadership that cares about improving and closing, improving success for students of color and certainly closing the gaps that exist. And that's important, and also the importance of faculty diversity and making sure that students feel comfortable and have other role models. So I thought that was an important comment to share with the group. We also have Constance Elo asking if we have a plan for comparable outcomes data on the for-profit sector, and whether we're working to incorporate the growing working adult student population. Really, really good points. We've not done more detailed analysis of the for-profit sector. I mean, I think our initial analysis around student debt at some for-profit colleges for students who end up with sometimes no degree or a degree that might not be of strong value has been concerning. But Constance, I know that you did your dissertation on that topic, and if you share it with us, we'll be happy to tweet out a link to folks that are interested in what's happening to students in the for-profit sector. I think the one point I would make is that California's strength has really been as a result of its huge investment in its public college and university system and in financial aid through the Cal Grant program for low-income students, and that's something that we have to make sure continues to be very strong in our state. But where we do a very good job in terms of sending many students to college, we don't do a great job at ensuring that they complete. And for many of you, you may not be aware, but California is actually 50th in the nation in sending students directly to four-year universities. We very much, send most of our undergraduate college enrollment is concentrated at the community college system. So I think a very real conversation about whether that distribution and proportion is adequate or should be improved or changed is certainly appropriate given the growing needs for educated workers. So I have another question. How can we promote among legislators as well as higher ed administrators a clearer understanding of the need for retaining counseling programs and student support services through budget cycles? These programs are too important to our Latino and Black students and all first-generation students to have them disappear when revenue sources decrease. Absolutely agree. And then another person asked, how can we hold colleges accountable? I think both of these questions speak to the reality that we in California fund enrollment growth solely, and much of our funding, especially for the community college system, is pretty restricted in terms of how that money can be spent. Often it can't be spent in providing the counseling and support services that we know students need. I think there's promising allocations through the Student Success Fund and the Student Equity Fund in the community college system that should help reverse that. But again, unless we are watching and ensuring that those resources are actually spent in ways that help students succeed, and unless we hold colleges accountable for improving their outcomes from the previous year, it should be no surprise if the data markers don't change. So it really gets to the point of accountability again. How do we make sure that our expectations are very clearly defined in the upfront, that we will do a better job, we will close some of these gaps, and we will, ensure that students have the support services that work. I think that absolutely has to happen. I think I'll take maybe one or two more questions and before I close this out. But one person says he or she is at a campus where there's a move towards increasing international students because they bring in additional funds. Are we aware of this pattern in the CSU and UC? So I think this is another area in this budget deal that's very, potentially promising. There is an effort through Senate Bill 15, sponsored by Marty Block and the pro tem leader Kevin DeLeon, to increase international fees and tuition pretty significantly and at a point where it would discourage, and there's been efforts to cap out-of-state enrollment. Clearly, we do need to remember that the University of California is primarily for Californians, and to the extent that we provide support, it should be directed at California students. We do need to grow our own, capacity to serve more students who are eligible in our own state over out-of-state students. So this is a pattern that we're aware of and that we're concerned about and that we'll continue to press around. So thank you for sharing that. And the last question, there's so many really thoughtful questions, so thank you very much. Kathy Bryant is asking, what detailed research do we have about Latino high school and community college students who have fears about applying for financial aid if they have undocumented parents? Kathy, unfortunately, we didn't delve into financial aid in this particular piece, but we know that thankfully with the existing both in-state tuition for undocumented students who have gone to high school in California and the DREAM Act financial aid for eligible undocumented students, that hopefully some of this fear is being eliminated, but obviously that is a very legitimate concern, and it very may well be a big reason why students choose to go to community college instead of a four-year university where they have been accepted. One of the analysis that we've done last year was around the real cost of college and how extended time to degree in college is expensive, that it isn't just about the tuition and fees. And so I think we want students and parents to know what the success rates are for students at the college or university that they plan to attend. They should be reviewing the community college scorecard and the data that's available, but we know that that's hard, so that they can make informed decisions and also continue to press our college leaders with that urgency of how we can better serve students and get them out in time. So a lot of things in the works to move in that direction. So with that, we will try to provide answers to some of the other questions that we weren't able to get to, but we really want to thank all of you who joined this call today. We hope that you share these findings, and most importantly, that you join us in pressing for solutions. We welcome your feedback and advice on what some of those solutions should be. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have additional research forthcoming that we are excited to be sharing with you as we continue to make the case essentially for the future of California, because it will depend on our ability or inability to close the gaps that exist here and to ensure that everyone has a chance to be ready for college, to go to college, and to graduate from college, regardless of their income status or regardless of their race and ethnicity. So with that, thank you for joining our call today, and we look forward to staying in touch.